All right, y'all, I need y'all to listen up. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not giving you the right kind of information. I need you to understand that not everything that is published means that it is true. We're going to talk about how I need y'all to think about when you look at a study and what these experts are telling you and whether or not it's true, so you can help assess for yourself. Welcome back to Level the Playing Field. So I'm going to say it again. Just because it's published does not mean it's true. When we talk about the scientific method, we're never talking about absolutes when it comes to what's true and what's not. It's a question of probabilities. So if I do a study and I'm trying to investigate if, say, ACL surgery really works or not, I take a certain subset of patients and we analyze them and see how they do. Now that can be based off of how well they return to sport. That could be how well they feel after surgery, what's their pain level like, whatever question you want to ask. But we want to get an idea of how they started and where they finished. And we do that by collecting data from the patient or data about the patient, information. We analyze that, and then we can say, based off what we found using our statistical methods, we can say, well, a certain percentage of patients saw this much improvement or didn't. But I can't say that applies to you as an individual. I can say that applies to the patients that I looked at in my study. So this is a question of what we call generalizability. Are these findings generalizable to the rest of the population? Okay. So if I analyze a group of patients who all play soccer, and I say this percentage of patients gets back to playing sport after ACL surgery, that doesn't mean that it applies to football. That doesn't mean that it applies to any other sport, really. And this is why studies are so hard to sometimes take and apply to everybody else. Because just because it's done in one population doesn't mean it applies across the board. And so we have to constantly be doing studies and updating our knowledge from a scientific standpoint when we're doing these things to find out what works and what doesn't work. And that's in medicine, that's really anything else. And so when we think about that from that standpoint, I really need y'all to be careful when you're listening to so-called experts who say they have studies supporting what they're saying. Because frankly, almost anybody can publish a study at this day and age. The question is, what kind of study did they publish, and what is the background or what are the basics of that study? So if we take studies and break them into two different categories, there are those that are non-peer-reviewed and those that are peer-reviewed. Now, peer-reviewed is the gold standard when it comes to studies. And what does that mean? That means that a group or a individual performed a study asking a scientific question, be it about a patient, about a medication, about a special surgery, and they found the result. Now, they don't just go and just put that on the internet and say, hey, I found this, and so this is true. It goes through a strenuous process while people are having to, they submit it, right, to people who then review that study and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and say, hey, this part of your study looks good, this part is believable, we're not sure we agree with how you did this part. Either we'll say, you have to edit this study before we publish it, or this is trash, we're not taking this, go back, start again. That's the peer review process. That process can take months, that process can take years. But the point is that process is done so that people who are not biased, who are in no way related to the author or have any stake in the game, can look over the study and say, hey, this is good or this isn't good. That peer review process is the basis of making studies that are, as true as they can be, or at least have the highest probability of telling us something close to the truth. Now, like I said, you can have a peer-reviewed study and you can have a non-peer-reviewed study. And the difficult thing in the internet age is that a lot of people can put information out there without having it reviewed in any kind of way. Or they could have a non-peer-reviewed study, which doesn't mean it's automatically bad, but you as the consumer need to understand that if it's not peer-reviewed, that means that maybe they had people who were in their own group review it, or people who are biased in some sort of way review it. Now, even with the peer review process, that does not make a study perfect. Things can still go wrong. So you can have a study that's not that great, but makes it through the peer reviewed process because simple politics related to that process. So all people are human, people have connections, and certain people have more connections than others. So if a given scientist or a given study doer or whoever's doing the study has more resources or more connections, they may have an easier time getting a paper pushed through, right? Or getting the peer review process kind of put in their favor to get what they want said out there. We have to take that into consideration. Disclosures, this is the big one. So if you have a paper and the authors on there have disclosures, what they're saying is these are things about me that could bias what I think about what I'm publishing, and I want you all to know about it. Or they are told they have to tell you what they know about it. I'll give you an example. So if I'm doing a study as a surgeon about a certain implant that I use to do a surgery like an ACL, for instance, right? You want to know, do I have any kind of relationship with a company that makes that implant? Because if I do, I'm not saying I'm going to do something unethical, but I might have a bias in the way I present the data to you. And true or false, everybody has biases, nothing we can do about that. But you need to understand that so that you can take what I'm saying and filter it through your own mind as to how much do I believe this. So disclosures are very important, and that affects how we take studies and what they mean. Now, there are studies that are funded by individuals, so I could say as the doctor, scientist, that I feel like I need to do this study. I'm gonna pay out of my own pocket. I'm gonna pay for what it takes to get the study done and get it published. You can have studies that are funded by grants coming from the government. So we submit to the government and say, hey, this is information that we think is important to the whole population. We need to do this study, and they'll either approve it, give the funding, or not. You have studies that are funded by industry, meaning that a company says, hey, doc, we want you to study this thing about this product we do, or about this surgery we use, or anything along those lines, a medication if it's a pharmaceutical company, right? And so when you're looking at studies, it's also important to think about who funded the study. Where did the money come from to make that study happen? And these are things that kind of, again, play into your mindset about how much I believe what the study is showing me or not. So it's not to say that anybody's necessarily trying to get over on you, but you as the consumer, as the patient, as the athlete, as the person in the driver's seat, need to understand the forces that come together to bring these studies to light, because a lot of times they're driving what we do and what we say. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on is a thing called power analysis. What a power analysis is asking if a study has looked at enough people that we can say that it's true enough to apply to more people, if you want to put it like that. So if we say a study is underpowered, basically what we're saying is you did a study, you found a result, but you didn't really look at enough people to really say that this is going to affect enough other people. If I take 10 people and half of them have a re-tear of their ACL, and I go out and I tell you that 50% of people, half of those, 5 of those people re-tear their ACL, and I say 50% of people re-tear their ACL across the board, well, that's not really true. I just happen to take 10 people who might have been high risk for ACL re-tear. I don't know anything about what makes them different from other people, and I didn't take a wide enough breadth of people in that study to be able to say that that applies to everybody else. So the power of a study is critically important. And you'll see a lot of studies out there that'll look at low numbers, 50, 100 people, and then try to make broad statements about, well, this works for everybody, or this is now true, or this is the case. You need to see numbers in the thousands before we start saying, okay, that makes a lot of sense to us. And it's okay if that's a stepwise process. You might have a few smaller studies. You maybe have like 100, 150 people, 200 people. But what you can even do, if a few of those come together, you can do what's called a meta-analysis, where you look at a whole bunch of studies together who all have maybe a smaller number and aggregate all that information together to get to those thousands of numbers. Then we can start getting closer to the truth. What I really need y'all to understand is that truth is not a single one-off thing that you find one time in a study and then accept forever. It's an evolving concept and it's situational. So when we're doing things in medicine, we're trying to understand what is the best thing, best way to treat a patient, and what works for the most people. We have to look at multiple angles, multiple lenses, multiple populations, different groups of people to understand how it affects different groups in different situations and get the best care for everyone. So if I give you one takeaway from here, man, is don't just accept a study just because it's a study. Just because it's published does not mean that it's the truth. Let's level the playing field, man. We'll keep on going. We'll see y'all next time.